When professional cave teams make amazing discoveries, it can get the attention of even people who have never been caving before. Going into caves alone is very dangerous, and most cavers say you should never do it, especially in hard caves. But sometimes the desire is too strong and the results are deadly. This is the tragic story of the Veryovkina cave disaster. Dmitry Volkov had been gathering information about the Veryovkina cave for almost a year. He was a 39-year-old married man with 2 children who loved adventure sports. This cave had recently been declared the deepest on Earth at over 7,200 feet deep. There is a horizontal cave network at the bottom that extends for half a mile with a maze of tunnels and water-filled passages. Although he had only been caving 3 times before, this incredibly difficult cave became an obsession he could not ignore. The extreme depth of this cave required multiple overnight stops to reach the bottom. Permanent camps were set up by the Perovo Speleo caving team from Russia. This group had explored the cave system many times and continued to make new discoveries of depth and passages over several years. This team worked in large groups with extensive planning for each expedition. Dmitry had learned about their most recent trip, which almost ended in disaster in 2019. The Perovo Speleo caving team was on an expedition with a National Geographic photographer named Robert Shane when a massive flood of water rushed through to the lowest part of the cave. A group of 9 were in the deepest base camp after a 5-day journey to the bottom of the deep cave system. A wall of water came in that sounded like a speeding train. The group retreated to their camp to wait out the flow where it was expected to drain down through the cave tunnels and pose no danger to their camp. A bubbling sound was heard from behind their shelter, and a quick check revealed an overflowing hole. The lower levels were already filled, and the water was now rising in their chamber. They had only minutes to grab the most important items and escape to higher ground. This meant climbing up a narrow vertical passage through a raging river of water. The Russian caving team felt confident and calm about such an escape, but Robert Shane felt no such comfort. He was as scared as he had ever been in his life, truly uncertain if he would survive this unexpected emergency. Climbing up the rope in a flood of water was bad enough, but squeezing through the narrow opening where it was rushing from was physically painful. He tucked his head down to allow himself to breathe while moving up the rope through the tight passage. The water beating on his helmet felt like a weight pushing his head into his shoulders. The entire group made it up to the next camp but was trapped there for 18 hours waiting for the water flood to go down. The entire lower level was completely flooded and would have meant certain death for anyone who did not escape in time. Dmitry had heard about the frightening story which was told in many versions, including a National Geographic article with pictures from Robert Shane. Dmitry had studied these pictures, collected maps, and taken screenshots on his phone of several items related to exploring this cave. For most people, the near-death experience of the Russian group would have put Veryovkina off-limits, but not Dmitry. He was an adventurous person who liked to hike, climb, and run marathons. His wife and children did not know about his plans to visit the deepest cave on Earth. He only said that he was going to find the meaning of life and would be back in about a week. On October 15th, 2020, Dmitry drove several hours from his home in Sochi, Russia to the Veryovkina cave. It was quite a hike up the side of a mountain just to get to the entrance of the cave. He used new climbing spikes and walking poles to make his way up the mountain to the entrance. Dmitry was familiar with climbing and brought some basic equipment for the cave adventure. The first drop would require him to set up a rappelling rope from the top of the cave entrance to lower into the main shaft of the cave. It was here that he left his fabric backpack and moved his equipment and food to waterproof bags to carry deep into the cave. He was expecting to encounter some wet passages and flows of water in various parts of the descent. He marked his map where water was expected but did not bring any waterproof clothes. The map he had printed out showed the main camps that were established by the Perovo Speleo team. He did not have permission to be in the cave and certainly not to use their equipment left in the permanent camps. Nonetheless, he was planning to use their base camps to rest between the climbs down to the bottom over a mile deep into the mountain. He had notes on his map with information he had gathered about particular passages, problem areas, and times expected to travel through each section. The Perovo Speleo team had extensive preparations, massive stocks of supplies, installed communications, and large teams of climbers to ensure safety for the 4 or 5 day climb to the bottom of the cave. Dmitri had just himself and the supplies he carried on his back. It seems that he thought he was prepared for what he would encounter at Veryovkina, but he was wrong. The first part of the descent was through very narrow and tight cave passages. This would be over 3,700 feet of difficult caving with several bags of supplies to drag behind and push through the tight squeezes. Dmitri reached the first camp at 1,200 feet. This camp is the staging area for making the largest vertical drop in the entire cave system. The Baba Tunda pit is an incredible 480 feet deep. This requires a rope descent without access to any ledges or stops. It goes straight to the bottom in this huge cavern. The PST team had a rope system left in place where a climber could lower themselves into the pit using a friction rope descent, then use hand ascenders with foot loops to climb back up. He noted that it would take him 7 hours to go from the entrance well to the bottom of the pit. His notes also show that he thought the trip back would take 3 more hours than the trip down this pit. For Dmitri, it must have been a frightening prospect looking down into the incredible depth. He decided to reorganize his bags and left one of the less important bags at Camp 1. The PST team had a huge lighting setup for the entire team to see each other. Dmitri would have had his own single headlamp with a limited range. As Dmitri lowered himself into the pit, he may have been completely excited finding the adventure he was seeking. Or he may have felt stressed by seeing the condition of the drop. No wall climbing or rappelling, but center isolation that would make going back up a real challenge. No matter his feelings, Dmitri lowered himself in the pit using the PST setup and continued on the hike down into the cave system. The bottom of the pit ended just a few hundred feet from Camp 2 at 1,900 feet. Camp 2 was a permanent camp set up by the Perovo Speleo team. They left the camps largely cleared out, but did leave some items for long-term storage. There was a tent, gas for heat and cooking, as well as a few non-perishable items of food like sauce packets. The strange thing about Dmitri's trip is that he was planning to be gone a week, theoretically enough time to travel to the bottom and back up according to the large PST team's timeline. It was clear that he ended up spending about 7 or 8 days in Camp 2 at a depth of 1,900 feet. It is likely that at this point he was concerned about the trip back up the Baba Tunda pit. His descent into the pit might have started easily enough, but 480 feet is a long way for a controlled descent. He would have been fresh and strong, allowing him to muscle his way through the exhausting effort. But clearly, Dmitri found himself in a devastating position. He realized too late that he had either forgotten or miscalculated an essential component of his climbing gear. He had no foot straps. Over several days, Dmitri likely attempted ascending in every way he could imagine. He probably attempted rock climbing around the perimeter, but that was impossible with the angles, distance, and equipment he had. A pure climbing of the rope with only hand ascenders is just not possible. Pulling your body weight up over and over without the assistance of your lower body and place to rest along the way is an impossible feat. Dmitri was using up his food resources in Camp 2 and did not have the proper equipment to go back up. The 7 days he spent at this camp were probably filled with heroic efforts to try to ascend and exhausted periods of time where he rested and tried to recover. His only options at this point were to wait out a rescue or find a way to climb out. No one even knew he was in this cave, and it was rarely visited, so waiting around would mean starving or freezing to death once the gas ran out. As for climbing out, he had spent days trying everything he could to get out. Each day left him weaker and weaker with little food remaining. No matter his reasoning, Dmitri decided to descend to the next camp. After at least 7 days at Camp 2, he probably was looking for food and additional climbing equipment. If he could just locate a pair of foot loops and a little food, then he could possibly climb 3,100 feet back to the top. The trip down from Camp 2 to Camp 3 would have been extremely difficult for someone not in peak physical condition. The PST team might have made this descent in 5 hours, but alone and weak, Dmitri probably struggled to reach this depth at 3,100 feet. But Dmitri did make it to Camp 3. It was a small victory, but was not the salvation that he hoped for. Camp 3 did not have any food or supplies that could help him. We do not know how long he stayed at this camp, but it would not have been for long. He was probably wet, cold, hungry, and exhausted. The only chance to survive and save himself would be to go even lower into the cave system. He had his map and knew that there was another camp a little over 900 feet below. He was probably completely spent, but had the will to survive pulling him along. Surely thoughts of his family would have made him fight through the desire to just sit still and fall asleep. At this depth in the cave, water was a constant issue. The trickle up above became a spray of water in some passages and a waterfall in others. With 100% humidity in the cave, he was not able to dry himself. He was wearing cotton work clothes and did not bring the proper dry suit for this kind of caving. At just 40 degrees, the cave and water temperature kept him in mild hypothermia. Without heat from the gas lamps up in the previous camp, Dmitri had to keep moving if he wanted to prevent severe hypothermia. But he was exhausted and had no food for energy. The only solution was to keep going. Dmitri got his gear together and lowered himself off the ledge. Exactly what happened over the next 280 feet is unknown. It is generally thought that Dmitri succumbed to hypothermia. He would have been wet in cotton clothes trying to lower himself on ropes in the incredibly cold environment of such a deep, wet cave system. Some think he may have fallen in his weakened state. He was wearing a cave helmet to protect his head, but the circumstances were just impossible. No matter the final straw that cost him his life, his wife started to worry after he did not return within a week as planned. She alerted authorities that he had not returned, but she had no idea where he went caving. The Veryovkina cave was over 3 hours from his house, and he did not make the proper request to explore this cave. Months passed, and it seemed that something terrible must have happened. It was fully 10 months later in August of 2021 when the PST team was ready for a new expedition into the cave. When they arrived at Veryovkina, they saw a rope dropped over the entrance ledge, which was highly improper. Leaving a rope at the entrance was against protocol since anyone might mistake it for an invitation into the challenging cave. The team moved into the cave and followed their normal pathways to climb down to the first camp. Along the way, they came across a set of walking poles and climbing spikes as well as a fabric backpack. It was clear that someone had been here. At the next camp, the evidence of an unauthorized caver was everywhere. Missing food, empty packaging, and open storage boxes made it clear that someone had stayed at the camp for a while. Judging by the evidence in the portable toilet, it looked like someone had spent 7 or 8 days at the camp. The team was a little annoyed, but also concerned. Was this climber still here in the cave? They would unfortunately find out on their trek to the bottom. At the 3,380 feet mark, there was a body hanging from their ropes, and clearly it had been there for a long time. The team was devastated to find that the caver was dead. His body was folded to the side, dangling from the ascenders he had connected to the main rope. Below him were 2 plastic caving bags. He had 2 cell phones with him and a multi-tool knife. The team could quickly see that he was ill-equipped for this type of expedition. He was not properly dressed, had no backup equipment in case of failure, and had no foot loops attached to his ascenders. The team took his cell phones and were able to find pictures that could be sent to authorities to identify the man. The terrible reality for his wife was compounded by the fact that they could not just pull his body out of the cave for burial. The grueling ascent was a serious challenge for any individual, and there just was not a way to lift him out through tight squeezes, curving tunnels, and long rope climbing ascents. The only solution was to dismember his body into manageable pieces that could be transported safely. After getting the funding and permission to do so, a team of over 90 people prepared his body and slowly lifted the pieces out of the deep cave. His wife finally had some answers as to what had happened to Dmitry and was able to lay his body to rest after a 10-month-long wait. Exactly what happened to Dmitry in that cave is not known. He left evidence behind on his cell phones, on his body, and in the camps. The position of his body and the supplies he had with him helped to form a story around what likely happened. There are other scenarios that may have resulted in the same evidence being left behind, but the conclusion rests on the most obvious pathway. His internal thoughts cannot be known, but we can certainly empathize with how he must have felt. He attempted an incredible challenge and unfortunately lost his life. The tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that await those who venture into the Earth's deepest places without proper preparation, equipment, and support. Cave exploration requires extensive training, proper equipment, and most importantly, never going alone. The depths of Veryovkina Cave continue to attract adventurers from around the world. But Dmitry's story stands as a warning about the deadly consequences of underestimating one of nature's most unforgiving environments. The cave remains active with scientific expeditions, but strict protocols are now in place to prevent unauthorized access. The Russian caving community has used this tragedy as a teaching moment, emphasizing the importance of proper planning, equipment checks, and never attempting solo descents in technical cave systems. Dmitry's family has found some peace knowing what happened to their loved one, though the pain of his loss remains. His story has become part of the cave's dark history, joining the tales of other adventurers who pushed too far into the unknown depths of our planet. The Veryovkina Cave continues to hold its secrets, but it has claimed its price for those who dare to challenge its depths without the respect and preparation it demands. For the caving community, Dmitry's tragedy serves as a constant reminder that the call of adventure must always be balanced with the wisdom of safety and preparation.